Chapter 17:01 Familiar Abilities. Katie spat. I just don't want to admit defeat. You guys are all fighting, and I'm the only one who escapes like this. If this gets out, how can I survive? The sea beast stared at the two losers in front of him. I told you, mere humans are no match for the Wulwan Empire. He suddenly opened his mouth wide, and the huge mouth looked as if it could swallow the black tortoise into his mouth. A hint of coldness flashed in Katile's eyes. Then let's die together, he said, and pressed his remaining hand on his chest. As a cyborg, most of his body has become a biomechanical machine. Since he has already done this, he certainly doesn't mind making himself more exaggerated. So next to his heart, a small reactor was installed. Once it is confirmed that there is no hope of survival, he will detonate it and perish with the enemy. However, just as Katie was about to take action, a cold current suddenly and quickly hit from a distance. Swish! The cold current spread from the sea surface at a speed visible to the naked eye, directly freezing all the surrounding sea areas. The sea beast and the sea surface where Xuanwu was located were also frozen instantly. In this sea area, within a radius of tens of kilometers, the waves calmed down and were completely frozen, like a crystal-clear mirror. And the frost power suddenly spread to the body of the sea beast, freezing it into a huge ice sculpture. Cartiers, who was originally planning to detonate the god of death of love, immediately stopped his actions. He and Xuanwu's eyes were soon attracted by a figure in the distance. In the sky, a petite figure quickly floated over. She was wearing a dark silver combat uniform with long hair like seaweed. Her small face was so white that it didn't look like a real person, and her delicate facial features looked like a little doll. Girls? Who is she? Cartiers and Xuanwu both fell into a short state of stagnation. They didn't remember that there was such a person in the coalition. Xuanwu quickly came back to his senses. I think it should be a strong man hidden in the snow in some region. And according to the current situation, it can only be from Shengjing region or Jiangnan region. Katie licked his lips. Who cares? As long as he comes to help, it's fine. Boom. The sea beast struggled to break the ice on its body, and he turned his head and looked fiercely at the enemy who suddenly appeared. Another one, right? The girl said nothing, but opened her small white and tender palm to the sea beast and the black and white commander in front of her. Glacier is coming. In front of the girl, a storm surged up, and the manic hurricane roared, like thousands of hungry wolves running, and the storm was mixed with endless sea currents, sweeping across the cold sea. The fierce frost storm attacked the two people. The huge body of the sea beast needed to move in the seawater, and the frozen sea surface obviously restricted its movement temporarily. Roar! The sea beast roared, and ejected an energy cannon from its mouth, penetrating the distant space between the two people, and the dazzling red light was blinding. But facing such an attack, the girl was suspended in the air without any sign of dodging. Break the empty thoughts. She opened her small palm, and an invisible wall of telekinesis directly blocked the huge space between her and the sea beast. Boom! At this time, the sea beast had gone through a series of battles. Although its physical condition was much better than that of Katie and Xuanwu, its strength was also close to exhaustion. This attack could not break the girl's telekinesis barrier. The black and white commander saw the girl's ability and made a judgment in his heart. Frost telekinesis, which means her close combat ability is very weak. He roared and leaped directly into the air towards the distant girl. Like a cannonball, his fists now smashed down fiercely towards her head. The girl didn't even look at him, but just swung her left hand hard. When their arms collided, the petite body burst out with infinite power and directly swept the black and white commander away like a garbage bag. Seeing this, Xuanwu and Katie were both shocked. They had never seen such a capable alien who could have more than 3 abilities at the same time. An alien like Zhang, who has 2 abilities, is already extremely abnormal. Bah! Cartiers spat out a mouthful of blood foam. Do it. Of course, they would not just watch the show from the side. The two saw that the girl's ability index was only about 17,000 at most. It would be a bit difficult for her to take down the sea beast and the black and white commander. At this time, the two who received reinforcements gained confidence and joined the battle. The appearance of the girl broke the balance of the battlefield. She caused great trouble to the sea beast and the black and white commander in the battle. What's more terrifying is that as the battle continued, everyone felt that her strength was increasing at an astonishing speed. What kind of monster is this? Everyone on the battlefield felt scared. They didn't know that just now, the girl in front of them had just absorbed a silver armor and a black and white commander. Because of the characteristics of her ability, she absorbs their power and the energy spring itself at the fastest speed. This causes her to increase her strength at an unimaginable speed. Xuanwu and Catalyze launched an attack on the sea beast with all their strength. They knew that they needed to rely on the girl to win at this time. Xuanwu opened his huge mouth, and the black light cannon condensed in his mouth. Catalyze also condensed pure energy characteristics with both hands to form super original water, aiming at the body of the sea beast. The sea beast roared, turned around, and wanted to kill the two bastards first. But how could it be so easy? He himself was already in a state of almost dry energy at this time. At this time, the girl was suspended in the air, her eyes staring at the giant beast on the sea with cold eyes, and her body slowly turned into smoke and dissipated in the air. The energy collision between the sea beast and Xuanwu and Catalyze set off a huge wave. Just when the sea beast was ready to guard against the attack of the little girl, he was shocked to find that she had disappeared. But he didn't know when a layer of black smoke appeared on his body. This kind of smoke was very familiar. In just a second, he immediately remembered, isn't this his friend's ability? His brain was in a mess for a moment. His friend was clearly in another battlefield. Why did he suddenly appear here? But the next moment, a sharp pain surged from his body. Puff, puff, puff. His body suddenly split into dozens of cracks, and blood gushed out like a fountain, including his huge head. Blood mixed with colorful liquids gushed out from his 7 orifices. Chapter 17, O2 Reaper. When Liang Yu and Hua arrived at the battlefield where Catalyze and Xuanwu were, they just saw the huge sea beast fall down. A girl with long hair almost reaching her heels flew out of his body as a beam of light. In her palm, she held a ball of dazzling red essence and then quickly swallowed it into her stomach. When she saw the girl clearly, Liang Yu subconsciously tightened the long knife in her hand, and Hua also hummed with vigilance. Yuan Kuya. Zhu Yu felt the hostility and turned his head to look at them. After finding that they were not his target, he was too lazy to pay attention. Her figure suddenly disappeared in the air. When she appeared again, she was already thousands of meters away. Liang Yu's eyes widened. Space-related abilities. But she soon remembered something and took a deep breath. Yes, if it's her, it's not surprising that she has multiple abilities at the same time. Hey, who is that guy? Cartier's was covered in blood at this time, but he still leisurely took out a cigarette from his body and lit it, puffing smoke while asking Liang Yu. Liang Yu frowned, not knowing how to explain Zhu Yu's existence. In any case, Cartier's is a stranger in Colombia. If he knew that Jiang district had such a scene, it might cause a lot of trouble after the war. Cartier's seemed to see through Liang Yu's thoughts and sneered. In any case, that little girl saved our lives. I don't care about other things, I just want to ask, who is she? In our intelligence, there has never been such a person. Liang Yu thought for a while and then replied, I don't know either. She looks like a genius hidden in a certain district. Tisk. Cartier's sneered disdainfully. He knew that Liang Yu didn't want to tell him. But now, at least they won the battle and saved their lives, so they didn't bother to care about other things. Meow. Hua was beside Liang Yu, making a warning sound. The beast's instinct made it know very clearly how terrifying Yuan Kongya's clone would be when it grew up. Back then, Yuan Kongya was able to break through to the realm of Ipsilon on his own without any regional-level power training. If it weren't for his lack of combat experience and his incompetent use of various abilities, he wouldn't have been killed by Zhang Yi's calculations. And now Zhu Yu has Yuan Kongya's genes, which also means that she has Yuan Kongya's abilities. Even if there are defects at the genetic level, Zhang must have devoted the power of the entire region to train her, and it is even possible that the defects in her genes have been repaired. So in theory, her upper limit is much higher than the original body. In addition, this time, Zhang must have been shrewd and used this great war to create an opportunity for Zhuyu, allowing her to absorb a large amount of high-level alien's essence and abilities, which is equivalent to directly improving her strength to an incredible level. Zhuyu will be very dangerous in the future, and it is almost inevitable that she will threaten Zhang Yi's position. Liang Yu frowned. Let Zhang Yi make the decision on this matter. The most important thing now is to deal with the aliens. Liang Yu was not the only one who thought so. Everything that happened today was also calculated by Zhang. If it was any other time, Zhu suddenly took action to grab the results of the battle and would definitely be targeted by major forces. But now, they are facing a huge crisis. As long as Zhu can help them solve the current troubles, then after the matter is over, this problem will be diluted. At this time in Blizzard City, Zhang was sitting behind a chair with a huge screen in front of him. Through the intelligent system of Zhu Yu's combat suit, he had already seen everything that happened on the battlefield. Zhang supported his chin with both hands, but the corners of his mouth could not help but rise. He had endured for so long and finally got his own ultimate weapon. After this battle, Zhu Yu's strength will grow to an incredible level. At that time, even Zhang Yi will be wary of the trump card in his hand. All this is wonderful, isn't it? Father, what should I do next? Zhu Yu's cold voice came. Zhang raised his head and praised with a smile on his face. My dear daughter, you did very well. Then next dash. He glanced at the battle report from the battlefield. At this time, the main battlefield where Zhang Yi and others were located, the god of death of love, had just exploded. No one has reported the battle situation between the Gatekeeper of the underworld and Zhang Yi and others in time. Zhang buried his head, and his eyes became complicated. He didn't know whether Zhang Yi and others could win. If Zhang Yi and others lost, Zhu would just die in vain. However, Zhu has now stood up to pick the fruit. If everyone else fights to death, and only Zhu chooses to escape, then he, Zhang, will become the public enemy of the world. After thinking it over, Zhang said to Zhu, go to the battlefield in the center of Tianhai City and observe the situation. If you find that the situation is not right and you are not sure of defeating the enemy, retreat. But if there is a chance to win, join the battle. Got it? Zhu Yu's cold voice came. She changed direction without hesitation and flew towards the direction of Tianhai City indicated by the intelligence system. Tianhai City at this time. Zhang Yi's plan successfully injured the Gatekeeper of the Hades, but it was not enough to kill him completely. A top-level alien at the level of White Bishop, the Grand Marshal of the Wulwan clan with an extraordinary physique, was indeed not so easy to kill. Even though he was seriously injured, Zhang Yi was still afraid of him. He started with the star-piercing cannon and fired at the body of the Gatekeeper of the Hades. Alexei also attacked with him. Two vigorous forces arrived in an instant. The Gatekeeper of the Hades wanted to roar, but at this time his throat could hardly make a sound. He tried his best to block his arms in front of him, trying to stop the two people's attack. But the two forces collided with his arms and directly knocked him out. Green blood splattered. The Gatekeeper of the Hades flew backwards for thousands of meters in the air, dragging a long gully on the ground, almost lying on the ground like a dead dog. Li Changgong excitedly drew out his long sword, ignoring his own serious injury, and was about to go over and finish him off. Let me kill him. Zhang Yi stretched out his hand to block his way. Are you looking for death? Zhang Yi gave him a cold look. Chaos, don't stop me. Li Changgong frowned and said, kill him as soon as possible, otherwise it will easily change. Zhang Yi said coldly, do you think a white chariot-level alien can kill you with a desperate attack? Chapter 17, 3 Chains. Zhang Yi's words calmed Li Changgong down. He realized that he was too impatient. Even though the Hades Gatekeeper looked like he was dying, he still had a certain ability to fight back from his previous state. One blow, like squeezing out the last drop of water from a sponge, would definitely wipe him out easily. Well, you're still steady. Li Changgong stopped. Ho Tu, it's your turn. Zhang Yi said to Ho Tu behind him. It's time to do this. Is it really necessary? Li Changgong was puzzled. Even if it's cautious, isn't it too cautious? It's better to be safe than sorry. I never underestimate my opponent.
Zhang Yi just said so.
He must ensure that the opponent is 100% killed and the danger is reduced to the lowest level.
Ho Tu said, okay.
Shang Dawen used telekinesis to take the blood of the Hades Gatekeeper from the ground and sent it to Yuan Kongya. Yuan Kongya took the drop of blood, and then her eyes suddenly turned dark. Enter reincarnation, she said softly. The storm began to emerge with her as the center, and the endless dark abyss was born under her feet. From the deep Styx, the huge demon body of the black and white impermanence slowly surfaced.
He.
Ha ha ha. The sound of laughing and crying made people feel creepy. After many years, Zhang Yi saw this terrible ability again, and the complete black and white impermanence also gave him a sense of extreme danger. Zhang Yi subconsciously stepped back a few steps and began to check his body. He was also injured in the battle, but fortunately they were all internal injuries. At most his internal organs were damaged, but he did not vomit blood. He would be fine after Zhou Kuo treated him. Black and white impermanence held the soul-binding chain and the morning stick. Yuan Kongya pointed to the gatekeeper of the underworld in the distance with one hand. The bodies of the two quickly became illusory, and they came to it in a moment. The gray mist was sobbing and shrouded the surrounding space. At this moment, the Hades Gatekeeper, who was lying on the ground like a dead man, suddenly jumped up. His hands and feet were already unable to move, but he still condensed a black supernatural cannon in his mouth. The Star of Destruction was fired directly in the direction of Zhang Yi and others. This was the final blow that he had condensed all his strength, just to take advantage of Zhang Yi and others' negligence, and finally complete the counterattack. But Zhang Yi was too cautious and did not give him such an opportunity. The faces of Zhang Yi and others suddenly became extremely solemn. Fortunately, Zhang Yi had already taken precautions and immediately deployed his defense thoroughly. The injured people also burst out with their last strength. Shang Dawen used telekinesis to form a supernatural shield to block in front, while Li Changgong and Alexei chose to attack in a counterattack to offset the offensive in front. Boom! The terrifying energy collided with each other, and at this moment, a sudden figure appeared near Zhang Yi and others. A petite girl with long hair, wearing the combat uniform of Yenyun Guard, stood not far from Zhang Yi. She raised her hands and immediately formed a shield with her mind power to block Zhang Yi and others. Cut off the empty mind. With Zhu Yu's help, the pressure on Zhang Yi and others was reduced a lot. They tried their best and finally blocked the final counterattack of the Gatekeeper of Hades. Hua la la dash. The sound of chains rang in his ears. It was the soul-binding chains of the black and white impermanence, which bound the body of the Gatekeeper of Hades. The power of rules could not be resisted, let alone the current Gatekeeper of Hades. He struggled desperately and screamed with his destroyed voice, but the soul-binding chains did not move at all.
Boom!
A huge guillotine descended from the sky, and a slanted gate knife was suspended thousands of meters in the air. The black and white impermanence pressed the Gatekeeper of Hades on the guillotine, and countless chains tied him tightly. For some reason, Zhang Yi suddenly felt something strange. It seemed like he had missed something, but he couldn't remember it for a while. Looking at the huge guillotine of hell and the black and white impermanence holding thick black chains, the feeling became even more profound. He frowned. What on earth did I forget? He murmured in a low voice. Then he looked at the girl who suddenly appeared, just raised his eyebrows, but didn't care at all.
Zhu Yu?
He knew that such a day would come sooner or later, so that after the incident really happened, the shock in his heart was not so great. Zhu Zheng has always regarded Zhang Yi as his greatest support, and at the same time, it is also the constraint he wants to get rid of the most. But for Zhang Yi, the Jiangnan region is no longer important. So no matter what Zhang does, as long as it does not harm his interests, he doesn't care. On the contrary, if Zhang is reckless and makes trouble for him, haha, Zhang will not be afraid of a clone. He was able to kill Yuan Kongya at the beginning, and now he is sure that he can get rid of this clone. The huge body of the Gatekeeper of the underworld, his body was pressed on the guillotine of hell, and the black and white impermanents held chains in their left and right hands, tightly binding his body, so that he could not move at all. Boom! The guillotine hanging high in the air suddenly fell down, and in front of everyone's eyes, the Gatekeeper of the underworld was beheaded. Seeing the huge head fall to the ground, the life energy of the Gatekeeper of the underworld completely disappeared, and everyone finally breathed a sigh of relief. Li Changgong sat on the ground weakly, his face full of joy of surviving the disaster. We won. Ha 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 ha. He laughed loudly. Shang Dawen looked at Ho too. It's finally over, isn't it? Are you okay? Nothing serious. I won't die for the time being, Ho Tu said lightly. Alexei, an honest man, also showed a relaxed smile on his face. He put the battle axe on the ground, leaned on the axe handle, and actually took out a large bottle of vodka that was almost pure alcohol from his arms and gulped it down. Everything is over. Their human camp has won the war against the underground civilization. This is worth cheering and being excited. But Zhang looked at the scene in front of him, but he didn't know why he couldn't be happy. He always felt that he had missed something, which was very important. After the execution of the black and white impermanents, they slowly disappeared in the air. They dragged the long soul-binding chains, and the clattering sound still rang in their ears. Clattering. The sound of the chains suddenly became clear. Zhang lowered his head and thought for a moment. The next moment, his pupils shrank sharply, and cold sweat instantly emerged from his back. A thorough chill rushed from the back of his head to his heels. Chains. Chapter 1704. Like an abyss. Just when everyone was rejoicing and thinking that they had finally won the war to besiege Huaxi State, Zhang Yi's face showed a look of horror. No. He pointed at the corpse on the ground. At this time, he didn't even bother to calculate the origin of the white bishop level, but retreated while shouting. This guy is not the one I saw at the beginning. Everyone was shocked by Zhang Yi's behavior. Chaos, you. What do you mean by this? Li Changgong widened his eyes, and a sense of horror emerged from his eyes. They finally relaxed, and now their nerves were tense again. Zhang Yi said, the Gatekeeper of the underworld. He uses chains. And this guy has never shown the ability of chains from beginning to end. The previous battle was too tense, and Zhang Yi had no time to take care of this detail. It was not until he saw the soul-binding chains of the black and white impermanents that he realized the key to the problem. Shang Dawen and others changed their colors, but they looked at the corpse on the ground and could not accept this fact. Bishop Bai's existence. Who else could he be, if not the Gatekeeper of Hades? Just after Shang Dawen murmured in a low voice, an uncontrollable feeling of terror and despair instantly filled everyone's heart. The sky darkened, and the heavy sense of oppression was like a cloud hanging from the sky, pressing down on everyone's head, suppressing them to the point that they could hardly breathe. Even though Zhang Yi's whole body was already cold at this time, he opened the dimensional door without hesitation and took a step back and fled in without caring about other people. Shang Dawen and his people stood there in a daze, and the ground under their feet became completely dark. From the distant southeast, dark clouds rolled in, as if a god had pulled up a huge sky curtain to cover the entire sky. The whole world was dim at this moment. Rumble. The sound of thunder rang above the 9 heavens. Crack. The thunder fell to the sea through the thick dark clouds, as if warning of some terrible existence. Shang Dawen raised his head with difficulty. He wanted to see clearly what exactly appeared in front of him. At this glance, he saw the existence that was high above. Above the sky, a tall and burly figure stood in the air. He was wearing a dark armor, unruly, and looked down upon the world with eyes that wanted to destroy everything. Shang Dawen finally realized that the alien they had spent so much effort to kill was not the Gatekeeper of the underworld at all. The real person was actually here. Endless despair enveloped everyone, and the top leaders of the major organizations who were observing here were also deeply shocked by this. The black-armored alien at the level of the White Bishop was not the real gatekeeper of the underworld, so how powerful would this one be? Shengjing District, Jiangnan District, East China Sea District. Almost all the top leaders of Huashu country had fallen into endless despair from extreme joy in an instant. It's over, it's all over now. All the top combat forces of Huashu country had been sent out at this time, and they had exhausted all their strength. Ho Tu, Shang Daowen, and others were all seriously injured. Zhang himself was the first to flee the battlefield. No one could accuse him of his behavior because they could not see any hope at the moment. They no longer had the strength to continue to resist this more powerful enemy. Although Zhang hid behind the dimensional gate at this time, his whole body was soaked with cold sweat, because he could not stay in this place indefinitely. However, he still had one last resort, which was to inject himself with drugs and force himself into a dormant state. Anyway, there was nutrient solution in the combat suit to sustain life, and there was absolutely no problem for him to dormant for 10 days or half a month. But what about the people outside? Zhang Yi's heart was very helpless. He was like a small animal hiding in the corner, avoiding the powerful monsters outside that wanted to prey on him. In the end, they still underestimated the wisdom of the Wulwan tribe. When they were calmly laying out the net of heaven and earth, wanting to use the time and place to win this war, the Wulwan tribe was not stupid enough to have no means to deal with it. The strength of the gatekeeper of the underworld was too strong. Once he made a move easily, he might be punished by heaven like the god of the Nest sun god in Neon at that time. So, the one he sent out was actually his deputy. It was not until his deputy died in battle and the entire coalition had exhausted all its means that he officially showed up and cleaned up everything. Behind the gatekeeper of Hades was a dark mass of the Fog Valley army. Among these people, there were 2 silver armors and a large number of low-level alien warriors. This army is the real army that destroys the country. Shengjing District. Meng Yuanjun thought of what Zhang Yi had said to him at the beginning. He had made up his mind and immediately threatened all countries in the world that they must support them immediately. Otherwise, he would launch the death of love and drag everyone down with him. At this point, there is no other option for the survival of the race. On the battlefields everywhere, all the aliens on the human side fell into great despair. The gatekeeper of Hades just stood in the sky and released that kind of domineering the momentum of heaven and earth made them completely understand that they had no chance of defeating him. The gap in strength was like a natural chasm. They looked at the gatekeeper of the underworld, just like mortals looking up at gods. Shang Daowen lowered his head pessimistically. The strong sense of powerlessness made him not want to continue to resist in vain. But Li Changgong roared at this time. Even if you want to die, you can't let your neck be killed. Let's go together and fight them. At worst, we can detonate all the death gods of love and kill as many as we can. Regardless of Li Changgong's personal conduct as a soldier, his bloodiness is unquestionable. Especially when people are on the verge of death, they will burst out with unprecedented courage. Under the instigation of Li Changgong, some aliens raised their heads and glared at the huge army of the Wulwan Empire in the sky. Even if they're going to die, they will die on the road to battle, instead of giving up resistance and waiting for the enemy to slaughter them like pigs and dogs. Seeing that these ants dared to look up at him, the gatekeeper of the underworld smiled faintly. He casually pointed at the space below, and the void twisted. The Zhen Yuanzi Zhongyu, who was right under his sight, did not make any sound, and his body exploded into a blood mist. Huala dash. Endless chains emerged from the space around him, crisscrossing and covering the entire sky and all the areas around Tianhai City in a moment. One of the chains passed through the position where Zhang Yi was before and sank straight into his different dimensional space. In Zhang Yi's astonished eyes, it pierced his body. Chapter 1705. Evening Blow. Zhang Yi would never have thought that his space ability, which he was so proud of, would be cracked by others one day. In his mind, The fear from 2 years ago resurfaced in his heart. When he first stepped into the Ipsilon domain, he had also felt the terror of the Gatekeeper of the underworld like today. The world-binding chain passed through the dimensional gate and pierced Zhang Yi's body directly. His eyes were dazed for a while, and time went back to 2 seconds ago. Tracing the traces of all things had a very real premonition of death, allowing him to make a prediction 2 seconds in advance. And now he saw the upcoming attack. Sure enough, the world-binding chain once again passed through the crack of the dimensional gate and was about to attack him. Zhang Yi knew that leaving the alien space would also be a dead end, but the current scene left him with only endless despair. He twisted his body as much as possible to avoid this fatal blow, but his left shoulder was still pierced directly by the world-binding chain. All the defenses on his body were completely useless at this moment. What was even more terrifying was that when the chain penetrated his body, he felt a special force freezing his body. All the strength seemed to be drained from his body, and it was extremely difficult to even move a finger. Hualala dash. The Hades Gatekeeper yanked Zhang Yi from the alien space to reality. He was not very interested in these bugs, but he was somewhat interested in Zhang Yi, because he remembered that he had met this little guy 2 years ago, and the special ability on him also made him feel interesting. It seemed a pity to kill him, so it would be better to make him into a powerful biological weapon like the 2 previous test subjects. Judging from the ability and potential of this little guy, maybe one day he can become a powerful biological weapon close to him. Thinking of this, the Hades Gatekeeper did not kill him. In the shadow space, everyone's heart was cold at this time, and they were ready to die with Zhang Yi. Sure enough, in the face of such an absolute gap in strength, all efforts were in vain. They thought that Huaxiu, as the world's top power, had the ability to compete with underground civilizations. But reality made them understand one thing. As a civilization of intelligent creatures, they overestimated themselves and underestimated those underground civilizations that existed from ancient times. It's over. Everything is over. Han Shanzhua lowered his head. As the patron saint of the Northeast region, he could no longer raise his head in his life. Even Zhang Yi was captured so easily. What else could they use to resist? The heads of various regions had already opened the briefcase of the god of love and death, ready to implement Zhang Yi's plan. But Ho Tu, who was covered in a black cloak, kept staring at the sky in the distance. Is everything really over? The Gatekeeper of the underworld raised his right hand. Hualala dash, the world-binding chains blocked all the space in the sky and underground, and wanted to capture all the aliens in front of him directly. Killing one Zhongyu to deter these little things is enough, and the rest can be left to make biological weapons. After all, the 5th-level creatures are still very useful and cannot be wasted. But at this moment, a ray of light rose from the distant earth. The dark sky was lit up with a white light. Zhang Yi half knelt on the ground. His body seemed to be frozen, and it was difficult to exert his strength. But he clearly saw his shadow being infinitely stretched on the earth. It was dawn. A vast light came from the north, quickly dispelling the darkness brought by the Gatekeeper of the underworld. Zhang Yi felt a familiar force approaching, and he looked up in astonishment, not knowing what had happened. And countless eyes in the world were staring at the battlefield in Tianhai City at this time. The Gatekeeper of the underworld seemed to sense something, raised his head, and looked into the distance with a serious look. The chains of the world were crisscrossed crazily, as if to block the entire world. Zhang Yi turned around with difficulty and looked back at the source of the light. On the flat ground, a white figure slowly walked towards here step by step. But his figure gradually became clear in everyone's eyes. A young man in a white robe, white hair, and skin as white as ice and snow walked towards them. Behind him, the world was filled with endless light. He walked out of the light and dispelled the darkness between heaven and earth. Zhang Yi's heart was beating wildly. He recognized him. They had met once before under the Qinling Mountains. This was Bai Longzi, who was transformed from a snake into a human. If Zhang Yi was most afraid of the 2 beings in this world, one was the Gatekeeper of the underworld, and the other was Bai Longzi. It was just that his feelings towards these two beings were completely opposite. In his eyes, the gatekeeper of the underworld symbolized destruction and darkness. But Bai Longzi, at the beginning, let them go into the Pacific Ocean. Later, when Zhang recalled that underground trip, he could clearly realize that if Bai Longzi really wanted to kill them, then no one present would survive. But Zhang, he didn't expect that he would appear at this time. Zhang turned his head to look at Ho Tu and Shang Dawen. Shang Dawen's face showed a look of relief, but still with some confusion, only Ho Tu slowly closed her eyes, as if she knew all this. The gatekeeper of the Hades looked at Bai Longzi approaching here. His movements seemed very slow, but in a blink of an eye he had arrived on the battlefield and stood in front of Zhang and others. Zhang half knelt on the ground, and he could see his bare feet when he raised his head. His skin was like white jade, and he didn't look like a man who could fight at all, but like a nobleman. But when he stood in front of everyone, Zhang and others felt very relieved. The gatekeeper of the Hades opened his mouth and uttered a series of gibberish. After a change, it became the standard language used by the Huaxi people. "Are you here to fight for this land?" Bai Longzi also opened his mouth. His tone was extremely indifferent, and he just said lightly, "Leave. This is not a place you can get involved in." The gatekeeper of the Hades seemed to have heard some huge joke and laughed with his head raised. "Even if you want to seize this land, your tone is a bit too arrogant." Before he finished speaking, he had already made a move. The world-binding chains flew across the sky, quickly blocking the entire space. Billions of dark chains crisscrossed and blocked Bai Longzi. Facing this attack that had no blind spots, Bai Longzi took a deep breath and blew it forward. She blow. He just exhaled like this, and then the chain net that blocked the entire world in front of him was instantly broken.